I don't think it's radical to say that I think the idea of a cinematic universe has run its course, but how do we get to this point? I did a quick Google search to find out other pre-existing cinematic universes before Marvel, and according to some guy on Quora 4 years ago, it was the first Universal horror films, so I guess the Dark Universe really was ahead of its time. Not that one. But keeping it real with you, the real prime example of the cinematic universe is obviously the Marvel Cinematic Universe. From the late 90s on, Marvel Comics as a company were not in a good way and had to sell off the film rights to some of their most popular characters just to help keep themselves afloat. As a result, they sold off the Fantastic Four, the Hulk, and most notably, Spider-Man and the X-Men. Those last two in particular helped to start off a new boom in the superhero movie genre, especially with the Spider-Man movies showing off an earnest humanity that helped to encapsulate the ideas of superheroes at their core and winning over loads of audiences across the world. Eventually, when trying to once again make some money, Marvel decided that they wanted a piece of the superhero movie pie. Avi Arad, who was the then head of Marvel's film division, decided to form Marvel Studios to try and get more money out of their films. Kevin Feige, who was Arad's second in command, decided to make movies based on the heroes that, Marvel still had control of, those being the core members of the Avengers. Feige envisioned creating a shared universe like the one that ran through the comics that the characters themselves came from. And then, in 2008, as the new head of Marvel Studios, Feige oversaw the creation and release of Iron Man. And also the Incredible Hulk, but that movie holds such a little weight that I think we can just kind of skirt around it. Don't worry about that there. A career-defining role for a reformed actor made the career of Jon Favreau post the annoying Christmas movie and released in the same summer as what was probably the most critically well-regarded superhero movie ever in The Dark Knight. This movie had no reason at all to succeed as well as it did, but with their backs against the wall, Marvel pulled off a really good movie with a style and some really impressive looking effects, even today. From here they picked up the pace with Iron Man 2, Thor, Captain America the First Avenger, all releasing before 2012's The Avengers. The first Avengers was a landmark achievement, putting in $1 billion at the box office and catching the attention of the dreaded mouse. Marvel kept the pace up, continuing to release films, and following 2015's Avengers sequel, Age of Ultron, Marvel were integrated into the Walt Disney Studios family, along with Pixar and Star Wars. With all these movies popping up, the universe built in lore and characters, all of whom general audiences were collecting with heavily. And in 2018, Avengers Infinity War came out, and this was the biggest thing ever. Genuinely, I do not think anything has ever had the collective audience as hyped ever. This movie pulled in so many people from all across the world and managed to hold the attention and leave the world waiting with bated breath for its sequel, Avengers Endgame, a year later in 2019. Feige said that Endgame would provide a definitive end to the films that had preceded it, and it would become a new launching point for the movies to come. Endgame isn't a perfect movie, but it was a perfect event, much like No Way Home, which would precede it. It provided a bittersweet but perfect end for both Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man and Chris Evans' Captain America, and left the universe in a way where it felt like it could have ended there and then. And this is where our problem arises. God, this hurts. This actually kind of hurts to say. I'm a big Marvel fan, but maybe it should have. When I say maybe the MCU should have ended at Endgame, that's not me saying that I hate the MCU. I still love a lot of Phase 4 and 5 MCU projects like Wakanda Forever, No Way Home, and Loki, all of which I felt were stories that felt like they had to be told, if you get what I'm saying. But also, it's like pretty much everything else afterwards feels unnecessary. We're 2 years away from our next Avengers Endgame level film, and yet it feels like we barely know any of the characters in this universe that are left standing. Shang-Chi is cool, he's really cool, but what's he gonna do against Kang? Punch him? What's Moon Knight doing? We haven't seen Captain America in 4 years, and Thor feels more directionless and irrelevant than he has ever felt before. As well as this, Marvel being the top dog in the entertainment industry seems to have made them entirely complacent. In phases 1, 2, and even 3, it felt like Marvel was out here to make a point and to tell a story worth telling. But now, when you see a lot of the performances, it feels like a paycheck for a lot of people. And it's felt that way for the audience too. Marvel films are not the same guaranteed box office successes that they were even 12 months ago, with Ant-Man 3 and the Marvels feeling like they got less than favourable returns. Do I think you shouldn't have made them? Not exactly, but I do feel like you could have, gotten more creative and cool with it. I'm not a filmmaker. I'm not claiming to be. I waffle on YouTube, dude. I'm not qualified to tell you how to run a cinematic universe, but I don't know. Maybe instead of having a smaller core of characters we know very well and seeing them clash and develop together, we're seeing a bunch of new characters revealed and no clue how they'll fit into the wider world of the MCU because none of them are really colliding, if that makes any sense. Even outside of the quality of the movies, Marvel is also continuing to run into problems with their plan to run Kang as the main antagonist of this multiverse saga now being in the mud due to Jonathan Majors, being a big piece of shit. They used AI for the Secret Invasion opening credits and then used, a 7-year-old to write the script.
And then my guy gets all the powers of all the Avengers at the same time and destroys the bad guy and then they just fly away.
What?
Another thing that keeps people away is the sheer amount of content. You used to go to the cinema 3 times a year before COVID to keep up to date with the Marvel movies. Now you've still got the 3 films a year, but you've also got 3 or 4 TV shows with characters from those shows popping up in the movies, or vice versa, where the characters from the movies pop up in the TV show. And if you haven't watched, you'll just have to sit there and be like, who is this? Expecting people to just consume this much content in 3 years is ridiculous, to be honest, especially when the quality does not match the standards that Marvel themselves set in the decade leading up to Endgame. The MCU, it feels like a bit of a mess right now, and to be honest, the movie that I see most people clamoring for instead is The Amazing Spider-Man 3, set in a different universe completely separate from the mouse. However, Marvel is not the only culprit in cinematic universe fatigue. I guess we better talk about it. The DC Extended Universe died last month with the release of Aquaman: The Lost Kingdom, and thank God it was brought out to the shed and shot. Christ alive. The DCEU was a tonally inconsistent, confused universe, and when I say universe, I'm using quotations, where there were seemingly too many cooks in the kitchen making movies that ended up just contradicting one another. Not to mention the 50 million projects that were announced that just didn't happen, and oh god, it was just a mess. Now James Gunn has taken over at the head of the studio, but to be honest, why are we going for a cinematic universe again? I trust James Gunn, right? That guy has not missed with any of the 5 superhero projects I've seen that he's made, but man, the thing with DC as well is they've released movies like Joker and The Batman, movies with no connection to the wider universe, and they pulled in a lot of money and had people get the "he's literally me" reaction to seeing these different interpretations of these iconic characters who were free to be interpreted as they wanted, unbound by the constraints of a cinematic universe, and having to set up a Flash nightmare where he comes back through time and talks about how Lois is the key to saving Superman from Darkseid. Like, what are you talking about? Star Wars then somehow has the same problem. Look, I'm going to be so real, and I don't mean this in a mean way, and I know some Star Wars fans are going to be really upset that I'm even saying this, but Dave Filoni made a good kids show 10 years ago. So now all these children cry on Twitter when he doesn't have complete creative freedom to just slam his action figures together on the big screen and bring people back from the dead to do it. The Mandalorian Season 3 was my breaking point with modern Star Wars. I'm sorry, but it was such a disappointment because they straight up said, this guy that's been the main character in the show for the first 2 seasons, this guy that you liked because he was a cool bounty hunter, yeah, he doesn't fucking matter anymore. Just let me enjoy a little, like, cowboy movie set in Star Wars. I don't know. The Mandalorian became a massive success because you could watch it with absolutely no idea how anything in Star Wars worked. I'm gonna be real. I'm not a really old Star Wars fan. I didn't grow up with the franchise. I'm just gonna be real. I grew up with real peak Ben 10. But The Mandalorian was something that really grabbed my attention even when I'd only watched the original trilogy and was watching the sequels as they were coming out. It was like the 5th Star Wars thing I watched. I watched the original trilogy, I was watching the sequels as they came out, and then I watched The Mandalorian because it had mainstream appeal. But by having all these cameos from characters, from shows that ended like 10 years ago, or movies that concluded 40 years ago, you are making people feel the need to take in all this extra content instead of just enjoying the content you're making now. The Mandalorian was set up as a perfect ground floor entry into Star Wars for anyone, and if they just thought it was a cool series to watch and then move on to the next thing, great. They could do that. If they just were like, this is really cool, I want to watch more Star Wars, then they could go do that. But instead, they went the route of,
now we're going to make 5 million things, and you're going to watch all of them.
By forcing everything into a cinematic universe, you instead get media now that is seemingly just a callback to the original thing that you liked 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, rather than just making new, interesting... Oh my god, shut up, dude. By forcing everything into a cinematic universe, you just get media now that's just a callback to the original thing you liked 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, rather than making new, interesting stories for the modern era to look back on. Like, come on. Instead of letting media evolve and tell new stories, cinematic universes instead make everything have to link together. Everything is overseen by one angry robot at the top, and Spider-Man can never just have a cool movie where he fights Scorpion, because instead he's got to go hang out with Doctor Strange and meet his alternate versions from different universes from the other movies that you liked 20 years ago. And Doctor Strange can't have a movie where he battles a classic Doctor Strange villain, because instead he has to meet famous Irish Republican Patrick Stewart and someone from a fucking anthology series who should never have shown up again outside of it. I'm sorry, I don't hate Captain Carter as much as pretty much the entire internet does, but why is she here? Go away! This isn't to say that cinematic universes can't tell extremely compelling pieces of television. Dude, I got so wrapped up in Loki, okay? And I did an Andor, and hopefully Superman Legacy will show that there's still life in the old dog yet, but can we just get more The Batmans and less Batman and the Wasp Quantumanias, please? The rise of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and a decade-spanning story that caught the attention of the entire world was a once-in-a-lifetime event, and while Marvel, DC, and Star Wars will probably always remain major kingpins in the Hollywood movie scene, it's gonna be damn near impossible to recapture that if you don't give it time to cool off first. I think it's time to admit that the time of the cinematic universe is beginning to pass, at least for a while, and I think it's time it went away for a long, long time. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I mostly made it because I wanted to ramble about stuff. And also, I got a cool new Rodecaster, which means I can do weird stuff like this. I'm in a big hole now. Or I'm in space. Bye. Anyway, okay, I'm gonna turn that off. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and yeah, I want to start streaming on Twitch. Don't know if it's gonna happen. Follow me on Twitter to find out if I do that. But yeah, bye.